Amelie had worked for years in Johannesburg, taking late shifts and saving every cent until she could finally buy her own apartment. To her, it wasn't just four walls. It was proof that she could stand on her own, even after a lifetime of being pushed aside for her younger sister, Nandi. On the day of her housewarming, she polished every corner, arranged snacks on the table, and pictured her parents' faces softening with pride. She imagined laughter, hugs, and maybe even a moment where she finally felt seen. But when the knock came and she opened the door, her heart sank. There was Nandi, not with a gift or a smile, but dragging two giant suitcases across the floor like she already belonged there. Behind her trailed her husband and their child. Before Amelie could speak, her mother clapped her hands together with excitement. "Your sister and her family will be moving in tonight," she announced as if it were the best surprise of the evening. The room fell quiet. Guests who had been sipping wine froze mid-sip. Amelie stood at the door, her lips trembling as she tried to hold her smile in place. She felt her chest tighten, her pride unraveling in front of everyone. This was supposed to be her day, her celebration, her victory after years of sacrifice. But instead of applause, she was being stripped of the very thing she had worked so hard for. The housewarming wasn't a celebration anymore. It was an ambush. Amelie stood frozen that night, staring at the suitcases in her hallway, but the truth was the shock went much deeper than what she was seeing. This moment had been building for years, silently, like a storm no one else noticed. She had always been the responsible one, the daughter expected to hold everything together. From childhood, her parents treated her as the strong one, the one who didn't need attention or praise, while Nandi, the younger sister, was painted as delicate, beautiful, and fragile. Everyone rushed to protect Nandi, to fix her mistakes, to keep her smiling. And whenever there was a choice, Amelie was the one sacrificed. She still remembered the day her father told her there was no money for her university fees. At first, she thought it was bad luck, that times were hard. But then she overheard a conversation that broke her heart. Her entire college fund had been handed to Nandi to cover a business idea that failed within 6 months. Amelie had wanted to scream, to ask why her future had to be the price of her sister's bad decisions. But she didn't. She swallowed the pain, packed her bags, and worked 2 jobs just to keep herself afloat. Meanwhile, Nandi continued to stumble from one mistake to another. Each time, their parents swooped in with loans that were never paid back, or excuses about how Nandi just needed a little more help. And Amelie, the dependable one, kept quiet. She carried her own burdens in silence, even when the weight was unbearable. People praised her for being strong, but no one asked if she was tired. No one noticed the way her dreams were pushed aside again and again so that Nandi could live freely without consequences. All those years she kept her head down, telling herself that one day it would be worth it. That if she worked hard enough, saved enough, sacrificed enough, she would finally build a life that was hers and hers alone. That was why the apartment meant so much. It was not just a set of keys. It was her victory, her proof that she hadn't been destroyed by years of being overlooked. But standing in her living room with Nandi's bags on the floor, listening to her mother talk as if Amelie's home was just another safety net for her sister, she felt something inside her snap. This was not just about sharing space. It was about erasing her once again, turning her hard work into someone else's comfort. The apartment she had worked day and night for was about to become a family dumping ground, a place where her sacrifices didn't matter. For the first time, Amelie couldn't swallow the anger. She felt it rise hot in her chest, sharper than ever before. All the years of silence, of being the shadow while Nandi shined, had led to this one moment. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her, it was the breaking point. She could not, and would not, let it happen again. Amelie stood stiff, her hand still on the doorknob, trying to make sense of what was happening in her own home. Before she could even open her mouth, her mother's voice cut through the silence with forced cheer. "Don't worry, Amelie," she said brightly, "this is only temporary. Nandi and Saifo will stay here with the baby until they get back on their feet." The words rolled off her tongue as if she was announcing something wonderful, like it was a gift Amelie should be grateful for. But Amelie knew that phrase too well. Until they get back on their feet was a sentence she had heard her entire life, a sentence that never had an ending. It always meant months of excuses, years of waiting, and her carrying the burden for her sister's mistakes. Nandi, instead of looking embarrassed, acted as if the apartment already belonged to her. She slipped off her heels at the door, neatly placing them against the wall, her smirk saying more than words ever could. She bent down to unbuckle her toddler's shoes too, chatting to her husband like this was already home. Saifo shuffled in behind her, saying nothing, his face dull and tired, like a man who had grown used to depending on others. Amelie's heart pounded. Around her, the family clapped, laughed, and raised their glasses as though this was part of the celebration, as though stealing her independence was just another toast-worthy moment. A new chapter for the family, someone shouted. Amelie's smile was gone, but no one seemed to notice. They were too busy congratulating themselves, too busy enjoying wine in the apartment she had worked day and night for. The sound of their laughter echoed in her ears, but it felt distant, hollow. Her chest tightened as her eyes swept over the walls she had painted herself, the curtains she had chosen with care, the furniture she had bought piece by piece. Just yesterday, these things had filled her with pride. Today, they felt like a cage. Every picture frame, every candle, every cushion she had set down with love suddenly looked like it was being taken from her. She tried to take a deep breath, but it only felt like the room was closing in. The apartment, which once felt like her safe place, now felt smaller, suffocating, like it was no longer hers. The voices of her relatives blurred into one long noise, celebrating a decision that had been made without her. She wasn't their daughter in this moment, not even their host. She was just the responsible one again, the safety net they could throw another problem onto. And as Nandi's child laughed, running across her living room floor, Amelie realized with a sinking heart that if she didn't fight back, her dream would be gone before it even had a chance to breathe. The home she built for herself was already slipping through her fingers. It wasn't safety anymore. It was betrayal. The room buzzed with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of glasses, but Amelie barely heard it. Her body was still, her face calm, but inside she felt fire building. For years she had been the quiet daughter, the one who nodded, the one who carried the weight so others could stumble freely. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She had worked too long and too hard, saving when everyone thought she was broke, investing when they thought she was just surviving, and building a future in silence while they overlooked her. This apartment wasn't luck. It was blood, sweat, and sacrifice. And she was not about to let them take it away with a smile and a clap of hands. She cleared her throat. Just that small sound was enough to make the noise in the room fade a little. Then, in a voice steady and sharp, she said, "This is not happening." The words cut through the air like glass breaking. The room went quiet at once. Her mother's smile froze before it slipped from her face, her father's cheeks burned red with anger, and Nandi gasped like she had been slapped. For the first time, Amelie wasn't silent, and the shock of it left the whole room stunned. Without rushing, she reached into her handbag and pulled out a small set of keys. Every eye in the room followed her as she walked calmly to the door. She held the keys in her hand like proof, her voice low but carrying enough weight to silence even the whispers. "I changed the locks last week," she said. The words landed heavy, twisting into the air like a blade. "If anyone tries to move in, the security company will treat it as a break-in." The gasp that followed was louder than the music that had been playing minutes before. Nandi's mouth hung open, her shoes still by the door as if mocking her. Their father took a step forward, ready to shout, but even he hesitated, reading the calm in Amelie's face. Her mother's hand twitched, as if she wanted to clap again, to turn this into another cheerful announcement, but she couldn't. The power had shifted, and everyone knew it. Amelie didn't raise her voice, she didn't cry or plead. She simply stood by the door, holding the keys, her back straight, her eyes steady. It was the quiet kind of strength they had never seen in her before, the kind that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. For once, she wasn't the daughter waiting for permission. She was the woman setting the rules. And in that silence, as heavy as thunder, Amelie knew something had changed forever. The girl they used to walk over was gone. In her place stood someone they could no longer control. The silence after Amelie's words didn't last long. It cracked open like glass, and suddenly the room was filled with shouting. Her mother's voice was the loudest, shaking with anger. "How dare you? Family comes first. Sisters before selfishness," she screamed, her finger jabbing the air as if Amelie had broken some sacred rule. Her words were heavy with guilt, but Amelie didn't even blink. She had heard them all her life. Nandi burst into tears, loud and messy, clutching her toddler as if Amelie had threatened to throw them out onto the street. "You're heartless," she cried. "You're abandoning your own niece. What kind of woman does that? What kind of sister?" Her sobs filled the room, but Amelie saw the act for what it was. Nandi had always known how to cry at the perfect moment, how to twist her weakness into a weapon. Then came her father, red-faced and shaking his head, his voice booming with false disappointment. "After everything I've done for you, Amelie, this is how you repay me? Do you forget the sacrifices I made? Do you forget the food I put on your table?" But even as he said the words, the guests exchanged knowing looks. Everyone in that room knew most of his so-called sacrifices had gone to Nandi. It was Amelie who had paid her own way, Amelie who had built her life with no handouts, Amelie who had carried the quiet weight while they all clapped for her sister. The whispers grew around the room. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, sipping their drinks as if they weren't watching a family explode. Others leaned closer, whispering about how unfair it was, how shocking it was to see parents corner their own child like this. The embarrassment spread like smoke, but Amelie didn't flinch. Her mother's face twisted with rage, Nandi's sobs grew louder, her father's voice thundered, but Amelie stayed calm. She didn't shout back, she didn't defend herself with excuses, and she didn't beg for their approval. She had given them enough of her voice over the years. Now, silence was her weapon. Slowly, she bent down, her hand curling around the handle of Nandi's suitcase. The wheels clicked against the floor as she rolled it to the porch. The sound was soft but final, louder than all the shouting around her. Gasps filled the room. No one had ever seen Amelie like this before. She set the suitcase down, stepped back inside, and with a steady hand, closed the door. The slam wasn't violent, but it carried the weight of years. It was the sound of a line finally drawn, a daughter refusing to be walked over anymore. And for the first time in her life, Amelie didn't feel guilty. She felt free. What her family didn't know that night was that Amelie had been prepared. For years she had been painted as the ungrateful one whenever she tried to speak up, so this time she made sure there would be proof. While her mother shouted about duty, while her father claimed sacrifices, while Nandi cried about being abandoned, Amelie's phone sat recording in her hand. Every word was captured, every insult, every admission that her parents expected her to give up her hard-earned home for her sister's comfort. She didn't argue with them that night because she knew she didn't have to. The truth was already in her pocket. A few days later, the storm began. Her parents, furious and embarrassed by how the night had ended, started calling relatives and community elders. They told their side of the story, painting Amelie as selfish, as cold, as a woman who had forgotten her roots. They spoke of family duty and tradition, hoping to turn everyone against her. In the past, it would have worked. Amelie would have been drowned out, her voice dismissed as ungrateful noise. But not this time. When she saw the lies spreading, she didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't even try to defend herself with words. She simply opened the family WhatsApp group, attached the video, and pressed send. The reaction was instant. Phones buzzed across households. Messages stopped mid-flow. People watched in silence as the truth played out on their screens. They saw her mother's forced smile, announcing that Nandi and her family would be moving in without even asking Emily. They heard her father's voice booming about sacrifices that everyone knew were lies. They watched Nandi smirk as she set her shoes by the door like she owned the place. And they heard Emily's calm voice saying, "This is not happening," while her family tried to crush her with guilt. The shift in the air was immediate. Instead of sympathy, her parents found themselves questioned. Relatives began asking why Emily was always expected to clean up after her sister. Elders whispered about fairness, about how wrong it was to rob one child to spoil another. Friends who once believed Emily was too quiet, too obedient, now saw her strength in full light. The narrative turned, and for the first time, Emily wasn't the villain of her family's story. Messages of support began trickling in, small at first, then louder. A cousin messaged privately, "I'm proud of you." An aunt wrote, "You did the right thing." Even neighbors began speaking about how brave she had been to stand her ground. Emily read each message quietly, not smiling too wide, but inside she felt lighter than she ever had. For years, her voice had been stolen from her. But with one recording, one simple video, she had taken it back. And this time, the truth belonged to her. Nandi could not believe what had happened. The video had spread through the family like fire, and instead of getting the sympathy she expected, she became the subject of whispers and side eyes. Furious, she tried to spin her own story. She told anyone who would listen that Emily was jealous of her beauty, of her charm, of how people had always loved her more. She painted herself as the victim of a bitter, envious sister. But the problem was, people no longer believed her. They had seen the smirk on her face in the video, the way she moved into Emily's home as if she owned it. The evidence was too strong, and her cries for pity only made her look desperate. At home, things grew even worse. Saifo, her husband, was already drowning in financial pressure. Bills piled up, promises to friends and lenders went unpaid, and the weight of their failures began to crush him. Instead of standing by her, Saifo turned his frustration on Nandi. Their fights became public, spilling out in front of neighbors, at gatherings, even in supermarkets. People who once envied Nandi's life now whispered about the cracks in her marriage, about how quickly her confidence had turned into chaos. The strong front she once carried, the sister who marched into Emily's house with smug certainty, crumbled. Soon, she was back in her parents' small, crumbling home, the same house she had always looked down on. Her designer bags collected dust in the corner, her once bright smile dulled. She was no longer the golden child, no longer the woman people admired. She was just Nandi, the sister who had tried to take what was not hers and lost everything in the process. Meanwhile, Emily's world shifted in the opposite direction. With the weight of her family's control finally lifted, she was free to live fully. Her apartment became a space filled with laughter, but not the fake kind that echoed during the housewarming ambush. She hosted her real friends, colleagues who respected her, and even investors who saw her potential. Deals were discussed over glasses of wine in the living room that had once felt like a prison. The same walls that nearly became her sister's safety net now protected her peace and became the backdrop for her success. Guests who stepped into her home could feel the difference. There was no tension, no guilt weighing in the air. Instead, there was warmth, independence, and a quiet power. Emily had turned her pain into strength, her silence into action. While her sister faded into the shadows of her parents' house, Emily flourished in the light of her own making. For the first time in her life, Emily was not the responsible one holding everything together for others. She was simply herself, free, strong, and finally living the life she deserved. And Nandi, who once believed everything would always be handed to her, was left to face the reality of her downfall. Months passed, and the storm seemed to quiet down, but the tension was still there. At a family gathering one Sunday afternoon, the air was heavy with unspoken words. Relatives chatted, children ran around, and yet Emily could feel her mother's eyes on her. It was only a matter of time before she spoke, and she did, loud enough for everyone to hear. How could you do this to your own blood? Her mother demanded, her voice sharp, dripping with disappointment. Conversations around the room died down. Everyone turned, waiting to see if Amelie would finally bend. Amelie did not rush. She placed her glass gently on the table, stood tall, and locked eyes with her mother. Her voice was calm, steady, but filled with the weight of years of silence finally broken. For once, I chose myself, she said. And I don't regret it. The words cut through the room, leaving a silence heavier than any shouting could have been. Her mother's face tightened, her father looked away, and even Nandi, sitting quietly in the corner, shifted uncomfortably. No one dared to respond. For the first time, Amelie wasn't standing in the shadow of guilt or expectation. She stood in her truth, and no one could take that from her. In that silence, the family finally saw her differently. She wasn't just the responsible one, the daughter who sacrificed and obeyed. She was the woman who had broken free from their control, the woman who had drawn a line and refused to be erased again. Later that night, when Amelie returned to her apartment, she unlocked the door with steady hands. The lights shimmered across the polished floor, the space glowing with warmth and freedom. It wasn't just a home, it was her peace, the peace she had always been denied, and the peace she had finally claimed for herself.